All right, so we are now on to the religious classifications. We just did the inclinations. For these definitions, you should use this lecture, and if you have it, you can use the textbook. As you define the terms, I want you to think of how to define them in your own words, with detail, and in relationship to an ultimate power, not just a god or a goddess, but in relationship to that which, well, a quote from St. Anselm is that than which no greater can be conceived of. So, the ultimate. Or how answers to questions of ultimate concern are found. If a partial definition is provided, you must add more detail to it in order to get the full credit for key terms. All right, so for some of these, we're going to look at a PowerPoint slide to help maybe understand them better. So monotheism. So one ultimate power. This means one God or one goddess, one singular divine power. Right? We'll come back to henotheism in a second. Polytheism. Polytheism. Multiple deities. Multiple divine powers. Multiple spiritual beings with no ultimate power. There's nothing that is above and beyond all the other deities. There are pantheons, there are all these different concepts, but there's not a deity that can't be injured, hurt, fall in love with a human perhaps, any number of different things that put them in a state where they are not the ultimate above and beyond everything else. Henotheism. So henotheism, there might be hundreds of gods and goddesses, or angels, or divine beings, or maybe just even 3 or 4 divine beings. But one of those beings is the ultimate power, above and beyond everything else. So in henotheism, we have some type of an ultimate power, but there's all these other spiritual beings. Sometimes the line between monotheism and henotheism can be a bit blurry. The main thing, though, is to remember that between henotheism and polytheism, that difference is in the notion of an ultimate power. All right, so if I say animism, what do you think of? Well, you might think animals, and that would be part of a good understanding of animism. But it's not just going to be animals. It's going to be the notion that anything in our world, usually something living or something like earth or the stones, has a spirit. And that spirit helps us to answer questions of ultimate concern. It helps us understand the divine, animals taking on that divine aspect. All right, when you think of ancestrism, we're thinking about ancestral spirits, those who have gone before us. Now, interesting thing about ancestrism, you will find some minor component of it in almost every culture around the world. Have you ever heard the phrase, don't worry, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt so-and-so, uncle so-and-so is still looking over you. They're still watching over you. Or the idea that we honor our ancestors so that they will continue to help us in our lives. And by the way, just real quick, it doesn't always have to be human ancestors. You might hear, oh, don't worry, Fido, your kitty cat, your dog is still going to walk with you and be around you. It's this idea that there isn't a end, and that those who have passed continue to have an impact on us, continue to contact us, speak with us. Now, ancestrism can go all the way to the point where this ancestral figure becomes a divine being. And we might think a lower divine being, or we could think that it becomes the ultimate power, if you will. more so a divine being, not quite an ultimate power. So in this case, if we look at Confucianism and the idea of heaven, Ri or Tian, um, was most likely an emperor, Emperor Ri or Ti. There's a few variations there. And this emperor was so loved in his life, and after he died, and this general belief of ancestrism grew and grew to where this once human is considered either heaven or the divine being. That you can take it as either direction. So that's ancestrism. All right, so totemism isn't in the workbook or your textbook for that matter, but at least it's not in there as a key term. But totemism is this idea that ancestral figures, animals, uh, any type of thing that can take on a archetype or centralized meaning, something very sacred. So, for instance, if you had a tribe and you had something called the Deer Clan, there might be an image of a deer on the totem pole. If you had the clan known as a paint clan, there might be something that is going to represent that paint clan, even a paintbrush, perhaps, or just a multicolored spiritual figure. These individual totems represent or connect this one thing with all of that kind. So if somebody was part of a stone clan and there was an image of a stone, that stone ends up representing all of the stones. You'll learn about this a little bit when we go through the tribal religions. All right, so next we have pantheism. So the way we think about pantheism is essentially this notion that everything around us is united and it is all identical to the divine, meaning everything's interconnected and it is the divine. Now, one other term that you will see on your list right next to pantheism is monism. So the idea of monism is that all reality is ultimately one. So you might say, well, how does monism differ from pantheism? Well, it's that same notion of mono versus poly. In monism, everything's just one. In pantheism, everything that we see are the components that make up that one. It's okay if you don't completely understand this right now. You'll read more about it in the textbook if you have it, or you can just understand it that pantheism, multiple parts, all is the divine, or monism, all interconnected, is unified. It's okay. We'll talk about it as we move through the course again. All right, atheism. So, atheism is irreligious. IRRELIGIOUS. It doesn't mean that we don't count it in the sense of a system of belief. I know I'm using the word belief, and it is the correct term to use because what we're talking about is it's how we believe we get answers to questions of ultimate concern. And so for atheism, where do those questions get answered? Science, logic, rationality, the scientific method. The idea of atheism, atheistic, means there's no God. There's no God because God cannot be proven sufficiently through the scientific method, through logic and rationality. That differs from agnosticism. Maybe there is a God. Maybe there isn't a God. I don't know if there is or isn't. It is impossible to find out. So I'm just not going to worry about it. This can also come up not just as overall there's no way to know about the divine. It's that there may be a divine, there may not be. I don't know, we can't tell, we can't find an answer, so let me go about my general life. It can also be how specific questions are answered. So when we're going through the Eastern religions, there's a couple of questions of ultimate concern. Questions that, for instance, with the Western religions are really important. But for the Eastern religions, they're like, I don't know, maybe the gods created the world, maybe the gods came later and something else created the world, and we don't know, and who knows who can proclaim it here out of how creation evolved. Meaning, this question, we can't answer, and we're okay with it. So sometimes a religion can have agnostic traits and still be henotheistic or polytheistic. We can see religions that might be ancestrally related, really strong, really important about ancestors, but also had this notion that there's a divine being. So there could be a mixture of henotheism. We can mix different parts of this. We can also have a question such as how is the world created, and the response being the Big Bang, and using what we know today of science, and that not getting in the way of a belief that the world is inhabited by spirits and animism. So when we go through these definitions, it's going to be this idea that sometimes we can use multiple ones to answer the question of what religious classifications can we use. Now, I want to real quick mention theism or theistic. Basically, this is the term that denotes a religion that maintains the belief in a god or gods. That's all we're talking about with the theistic. All right. Next video will be on religious orientations.